My estranged grandmother left me a historic mansion and a single note: "Don't trust their smiles." 12 hours after I moved in, the wealthiest family in the city knocked on my door, desperate to buy it back at any cost. The roar of a diesel engine ripped through the quiet Charleston morning. I stood with my arms crossed in the main foyer of the Magnolia estate, feeling the tremors travel from the ancient oak floorboards up to my boots. Standing opposite me were 3 men in expensive tailored suits. They spread out like a tactical unit, blocking the exits. The one in the middle, his gold-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose, slid a thin piece of paper across the mahogany coffee table. $2 million, Miss Vance. His tone was flat, not hiding his condescension. An incredibly generous figure, especially for someone without roots in this city. The Hawthorne family is prepared to pay immediately. In exchange, you simply sign this waiver, relinquishing your inheritance rights, and vacate the property within 24 hours. I looked down at the check. $2 million. For an art restorer living in a cramped, rented apartment in Chicago like me, that was a sum I wouldn't dare dream of in a lifetime. But I wasn't looking at the amount. My eyes were glued to the sharp signature at the bottom corner: Blythe Hawthorne. You bring an excavator to my front door, rev it up as a threat, then come in here, hand me a piece of scrap paper, and call it generosity? I smirked, not shifting my defensive stance. That wasn't a threat, Ms. Vance. It was a reminder of reality. A deep, icy female voice echoed from the front door. Blythe Hawthorne walked in. She was in her 60s, but possessed a beauty frozen by time and money. Her platinum blonde hair was pinned up without a single hair out of place. Her pearl-colored silk dress was flawless, and the faint scent of jasmine perfume immediately overpowered the musty smell of the old house. In art restoration, we have a term called pentimento, the faint traces of the original sketch hiding beneath the top layer of magnificent paint. Blythe Hawthorne was coated in a layer of southern hospitality, but I could see right through her pentimento. Ruthlessness and arrogance ingrained in her blood. Your grandmother, Eleanor, was a resourceful woman. Blythe slowly paced across the foyer, her heels clicking sharply. She ran a finger, adorned with a massive diamond ring, along the edge of the dusty fireplace mantel. Through some despicable deceit, she manipulated my father-in-law into handing over the deed to Magnolia. But little girl, what isn't yours can never be kept. You working-class people always confuse pity with entitlement. I clenched my fists in my pockets, my nails digging deep into my palms to keep my voice from trembling with anger. Grandmother Eleanor had been a stranger for the 26 years of my life. An estranged grandmother who never sent a single birthday card suddenly passed away and left me this entire estate with just one handwritten line: "Don't trust them. Keep Magnolia." I might not have known her well, but I understood the clear disdain on the face of the most powerful woman in Charleston. Forgive me, Mrs. Hawthorne, but your listening comprehension seems to be flawed. I took a step forward, closing the distance. I picked up the $2 million check. With a decisive motion, I tore it in half, then into quarters, to the shock of the 3 lawyers. The pieces of paper fluttered down onto the rotting Persian rug. I'm not selling, and I certainly don't take orders from people who call themselves aristocrats but act like cheap debt collectors. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, already dialing 911. My inheritance papers have been legally validated by the State Court of South Carolina. This property is under the name Delaney Vance. You have exactly 3 minutes before I ask the Charleston police to come here and file a report for criminal trespassing. Believe me, I wouldn't mind letting the local press snap a picture of the Hawthorne matriarch being dragged out of someone else's house in handcuffs. A blue vein twitched lightly at Blythe's temple. Her noble mask cracked slightly, revealing eyes as sharp as razors. She wasn't used to being rejected, much less threatened by someone she considered trash. "You're digging your own grave in this city, Delaney." Her voice hissed through her teeth, stripped of any warmth from her polite facade. "I'm from Chicago," I replied coldly. "Over there, we know how to shovel our own snow to clear a path. The exit is right behind you." Blythe didn't say another word. She turned on her heel, dragging her 3 lawyers out in silence. 5 minutes later, the excavator's engine died. The vehicle pulled away, returning a heavy silence to the Magnolia estate. As darkness fell and enveloped Charleston, Magnolia became a solitary fortress. Long shadows from the oak trees outside cast through the windows, dancing on the peeling walls. I quickly ate half a cold sandwich left over from yesterday, strapped on my headlamp, and began my work. If my grandmother had spent half her life protecting this house to the point of being disowned by her family, there had to be a reason. It wasn't for its architectural beauty, nor its prime location. Something was hidden here. I chose the library as my starting point. A massive room filled with thousands of moldy books, radiating the pungent smell of rotting paper and aged wood. Under the focused beam of my headlamp, the trained eyes of a restorer helped me catch the smallest details. I ran my hand along the oak-paneled wall behind the solid mahogany desk. Everything was normal, until I touched a hidden corner behind a torn red velvet curtain. The wallpaper in this area was wrong. It was blistered. In old southern homes, high humidity often causes wallpaper to peel, but this blister formed a perfect rectangle, larger than a book. It wasn't natural dampness. It was a cut that had been pasted over. My heart skipped a beat. I ran to the foyer and dug through my specialized toolkit. I pulled out a bottle of adhesive softening solvent, a mild chemical mixture usually used to peel off old layers of paint without damaging the surface, along with a microsurgical scalpel. Back in the library, I put on rubber gloves and carefully used a cotton swab dipped in the solvent to gently rub the edges of the blister. A sharp chemical smell rose, blending with the stifling air of the closed room. I held my breath, focusing intensely as if operating on a Renaissance painting. 15 patient minutes passed, and the aged glue began to soften. I slipped the tip of the scalpel into the gap and gently peeled away the damask lily wallpaper. Beneath the paper wasn't a wooden wall. It was a tarnished brass plate. In the center of the brass plate was a small mechanical lock. The keyhole was empty. I frowned. I didn't have the key. I ran my fingers along the edge of the plate, tapping it lightly. A hollow sound echoed. Its hinges were very loose. With a hard pry using the handle of my scalpel, the decades-old rusted lock snapped. The brass plate popped open, revealing a dark recess deep within the wall. Inside the recess was only an old cedar wood box. Trembling, I pulled the box out and placed it on the desk. Inside was a stack of yellowed documents carefully wrapped in a sealed plastic bag, and a pigskin-bound notebook. I pulled out the stack of documents. The first piece of paper that caught my eye bore the seal of a notary office that had shut down in the 80s. It was a sworn statement. Skimming through the ink-smudged typewritten lines, my eyes widened and my breath caught in my throat. I, Arthur Hawthorne, being of sound mind, hereby admit my direct involvement in the supply and authentication ring of forged European artworks, codename Project Caravaggio, between 1985 and 1992. All authentication certificates signed under my name are forgeries, intended to bypass federal customs. All profits from these operations were transferred directly into the Hawthorne family's private trust fund. At the very bottom was the shaky but clear handwritten signature of Arthur Hawthorne, the late, powerful patriarch of the Hawthorne family, Blythe Hawthorne's father-in-law. The truth hit me like a bucket of ice water. The Hawthorne family boasted of their prestige, their massive charitable donations, and the finest private art collection on the East Coast. But the foundation of that wealth was built on a massive art smuggling and forgery ring. My grandmother wasn't a gold digger who conned their family. She held a fatal secret that could completely destroy their reputation and send the entire Hawthorne family to prison. This Magnolia estate, it wasn't an inheritance. It was hush money, a prison keeping rotten secrets locked away. I hurriedly shoved the papers back into the box. I needed to hide it. I needed to find out where those forged artworks were currently located. If the art world found out about this, ding dong! The electronic doorbell suddenly pierced the silent night, making me jump. The box slipped from my hands and hit the floor. 11:30 at night. Who would come to an abandoned mansion at this hour? I quickly gathered the scattered papers, shoved them carelessly into my jacket pocket, grabbed the heavy framing hammer from my toolkit, and tiptoed out to the foyer. I turned off my headlamp, hid behind the stained glass window, and peeked out at the porch. Under the sickly yellow glow of the flickering porch light stood a man. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his tie meticulously knotted down to the last fold, completely out of place against Magnolia's desolate backdrop. His slicked back hair and that familiar half-smirk, there was no mistaking him. It was Sterling Hawthorne, Blythe's eldest son, the man local magazines dubbed Charleston's Golden Bachelor. Gripping the hammer handle tightly, I slowly unlatched the deadbolt, opening the door just a crack. "What do you want, Sterling?" "Didn't your mother teach you that bringing an excavator to someone's house during the day and personally stalking them at night is uncivilized behavior?" Sterling didn't seem fazed by my hostility. He casually slipped a hand into his pocket, his deep blue eyes piercing through the narrow gap, looking straight into mine. The smile on his lips vanished, replaced by a deadly serious and sharp expression. "You really have no idea what kind of fire ant nest you've just kicked, Delaney," Sterling said softly, his voice low and smooth, but carrying the undertone of a lethal warning. He took a step forward, the toe of his leather shoe brushing against the stone step. "My dear mother never knows how to stop until her opponent is completely crushed. I'm not here to threaten you." He paused for a beat, his gaze shifting past my shoulder, staring into the dark void inside the mansion, then looked back at me with an inscrutable smile. "I'm here to help you survive in this city." Sterling Hawthorne's offer of help sounded like a rattlesnake promising not to bite you. That night, I didn't chase him away, but I didn't invite him inside either. I stood behind the half-open door, listening to his plan. Sterling claimed the only way I wouldn't get swallowed alive by his mother, Blythe, in legal battles was to make a public appearance. He invited me as his +1 to the Heritage Charity Gala on Saturday night, the most important event for Charleston's elite. "They're painting you as a penniless grifter clinging to our family." Sterling shrugged, adjusting his cuffs. "Show up, hold your head high, and let me introduce you to the heavy hitters. If they see you can't be easily bullied, my mother will have to back down." I agreed, not because I trusted Sterling, but because I needed to know who my enemies were. Moreover, with his grandfather's written confession to art forgery tucked in my pocket, I was confident I had the upper hand. Saturday night, I walked into the ballroom of the Charleston Place Hotel. I wore a simple, sharp, bias-cut black silk slip dress, paired with a vintage pearl necklace I found in Grandmother Eleanor's trunk. My arrival alongside Sterling Hawthorne immediately sent ripples through the room. The violins seemed to quiet down, making way for hushed whispers. Eyes as sharp as box cutters scanned me from head to toe. "Oh, good Lord! Look who is crashing the party!" A shrill female voice rang out. It was Fiona Abernathy, a plump woman wrapped in peach-coloured silk, holding a bubbling flute of champagne. Fiona was known as the broadcasting station of Charleston's high society. Every dirty secret passed through her ears before hitting the tabloids. She glided over, flashing a sweet smile that didn't quite reach her cold eyes. "Dearest Sterling, you are so brave to bring Ms. Vance here to an event like this." "Hello, Delaney. I hear you've been quite busy exploring the Magnolia estate. Poor Eleanor, alone her whole life. And in death, a granddaughter drops from the sky to snatch up her assets. Everyone here is terribly worried for the Hawthornes." I maintained my calm smile, raising my champagne glass to clink lightly against hers. The crystal chimed. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Abernathy, but I assure you, the only thing I'm snatching up is the patience required to listen to baseless rumors." Fiona Abernathy froze slightly, her smile stiffening. Sterling cleared his throat beside me, seemingly trying to hide an amused grin. He excused himself to get more drinks, leaving me alone among the wolves. I wove through the crowd, finding a quiet corner near the art exhibition area to breathe. Don't trust his smile. A warm, deep male voice came from behind a marble statue. I startled and turned around. A man around 28, wearing a slightly worn black suit, stood there holding a leather-bound notebook, tracking the auction items. He had brown hair falling over his forehead and incredibly sharp, observant eyes. "I'm Holden Croft, the city archivist. I'm keeping the books for tonight's auction," he introduced himself, his eyes never leaving Sterling's back in the distance. "Sterling Hawthorne didn't bring you here to protect you. He brought you here as bait. That family never does anything that doesn't benefit them. Be careful." Before I could ask anything else, a deafening crash shattered the conversation. I whipped my head around. A waiter carrying a tray of red wine had just slammed into me, even though I was standing perfectly still. The glasses shattered, sending a wave of dark red liquid splashing, not on me, but straight onto the classic oil painting displayed on the easel right next to me. The entire ballroom fell dead silent. Blythe Hawthorne parted the crowd and stepped forward. Her eyes flashed with undisguised triumph. "Good heavens!" Blythe gasped, her voice projecting to ensure everyone heard. She pointed a finger at me. "Miss Vance, do you have any idea what you've just done? That is sunset on the harbor by a renowned 19th century master. The centerpiece of tonight's auction, valued at $500,000. Your lower-class clumsiness just destroyed a piece of heritage." Whispers erupted. Eyes bore into me, full of judgment and disdain. Blythe stepped closer, dropping her voice but keeping it loud enough for me to hear clearly. "You don't have $500,000 to pay for damages, Delaney. But don't worry, the transfer deed for Magnolia is already prepared by my lawyer out in the car. Sign it, and I'll clean up this mess for you." I looked at Blythe, at the waiter trembling with his head bowed, at the streak of red wine dripping down the canvas. A setup far too perfect, too ostentatious, but she had miscalculated one thing. I wasn't some timid girl easily bullied. I was a professional art restorer. Instead of panicking, I calmly stepped right up to the painting. I pulled a specialized jeweler's loop with a micro UV LED light from my clutch, an inseparable tool of my trade. I shined the light across the painting's surface, ignoring the murmuring crowd. "Mrs. Hawthorne is right. This is indeed a mess." I spoke up, my voice clear and resonant. "But I didn't cause it." I spun around, looking Blythe dead in the eye, then swept my gaze across the event organizers. "This painting wasn't painted in the 19th century. It's a fake, and a very sloppy fake made somewhere around the late 90s. The ballroom erupted in gasps. Blythe's face changed colors. "What kind of nonsense are you spouting? Are you trying to use cheap lies to dodge responsibility?" I hold a master's degree in art conservation from the Art Institute of Chicago. I fired back, pointing directly at the bottom left corner of the painting, where the paint was blistering from the wine. First 19th century painters used oil paint bound with linseed oil, which takes decades to form natural crackling patterns. The cracks on this painting are too uniform. This is a sign of baking the canvas in a high-temperature oven to force the paint to crack. Second, I ran a silk-gloved finger lightly along the edge of the frame. Under UV light, classic zinc-white paint fluoresces yellow-green. Here, it's glowing bright purple. This is titanium white, a synthetic pigment not widely used until after 1920. Someone used modern acrylic paint, force-dried it, and then applied a layer of yellowed varnish to fake the passage of time. I stepped closer to Blythe, lowering my voice but speaking with absolute steel. If you want to sue me for ruining a $50 flea market replica canvas, be my guest. But if you want to strong-arm me into handing over Magnolia, find yourself a better script. The silence in the ballroom thickened into a solid wall. Blythe Hawthorne's face went pale, then flushed a furious crimson. The eyes that had been judging me just moments ago now shifted their suspicion toward the organizers and the Hawthorne family. Sterling stood in the corner, his lips pressed into a tight line. The look he gave me was no longer condescending, but wary. I didn't wait for their reaction. I placed my champagne flute onto a waiter's tray, turned on my heel, and marched straight out the hotel doors. The Charleston sky began pouring a thick, misty drizzle. I got into my rented old model car from the airport and started the engine. My heart was pounding, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I had won a round, but I knew Blythe wouldn't let it go. Driving down a dark dirt road, flanked by oak trees dripping with grey Spanish moss, leading back to Magnolia, the car suddenly violently swerved. The steering wheel jerked hard to the right. A sickening thwack thwack sound echoed from the undercarriage. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over onto the deserted shoulder. Grabbing my umbrella and flashlight, I stepped out to inspect it. The front right tire was completely flat. But when I shined the light closer, my blood ran cold. It wasn't from running over a nail. The sidewall of the tire had been slashed with a clean, long cut. Someone had deliberately sabotaged it in the hotel parking lot. The rain grew heavier, and the dead silence of the desolate road sent a chill down my spine. Someone was sending a wordless threat. Right then, a pair of headlights swept through the rain, shining directly at me. An old pickup truck pulled up behind my car. I backed away, slipping my hand into my jacket pocket to grip my pepper spray. The truck door opened, and a tall, lean silhouette stepped out into the rain. It was Holden Croft. "Do you need a hand?" he said, his warm voice cutting through the pouring rain. He expertly grabbed the jack and spare tire from my trunk and swapped them out, moving swiftly and speaking very little. 15 minutes later, we were sitting in the cab of his pickup truck to stay warm, waiting for the heater to dry our clothes. "Were you following me, Mr. Croft?" I spoke up, still keeping a guarded distance. The coincidence was too perfect. Holden didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead through the windshield as the wipers frantically switched back and forth. I just happened to be taking the same route, but I did see one of the Hawthorne security guys lurking around your car at the hotel. He turned to look at me, his eyes a deep amber under the dashboard lights. The atmosphere in the truck suddenly grew strangely suffocating. "You dealt a massive blow to Blythe's pride tonight, Delaney, but you're playing with fire. Arthur Hawthorne's notebook and written confession. You've already found them at Magnolia, haven't you?" I froze. The blood in my veins felt like it turned to ice. I had never told anyone about the things hidden behind the wallpaper. How do you know?" Holden let out a soft sigh, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight. "Because, Delaney, your grandmother wasn't the only person who had everything stolen by the Hawthorne family." Holden Croft's words hung in the cramped space of the truck's cab, blending with the sound of the rain lashing against the windshield. "How do you know?" I pressed, my hand still tightly gripping the pepper spray in my pocket. Holden turned off the heater, and the space plunged into a suffocating silence. "I'm an archivist, Delaney. My job is to read the things other people want buried. I've been tracking the Hawthorne family's anomalous cash flow for a long time. When your grandmother died and left Magnolia to an outsider, all the pieces suddenly clicked together. I just didn't know exactly where she hid the evidence inside that house." I glared into his eyes. There was a jagged sincerity in those amber eyes, but here in Charleston, I had learned not to trust anything with a flawless exterior. However, I was alone, and I needed someone who knew the city's information systems inside out. "If you really know how to read buried things, prove it," I said, my voice sharp. The next night, we stood in the dark library of Magnolia. A lantern cast a yellow circle of light over the mahogany desk, where I had flattened out the yellow documents and Eleanor's pigskin notebook. Holden carefully turned each page using the white cotton gloves he always carried. The handwritten lines were in tiny black ink, covered in a maze of numbers and strange symbols. "Your grandmother didn't use standard ciphers," Holden squinted, bringing the place to the light. "This is an art classification system. Look at these abbreviations: R1606, C1599. I leaned in, memories of days spent grinding away in museum archives rushing back. "That's not a code. It's a catalogue of Caravaggio and Rembrandt's works, sorted by the year of creation. R1606 is Rembrandt's self-portrait. C1599 is Judith beheading Holofernes." I cross-referenced the numbers next to those names. Each figure corresponds to a Swiss bank account number and a transaction date. We threw ourselves into the work like two machines, moving at a frantic pace with an uncanny synchronization. Layer by layer, the curtain of secrecy was peeled back by the solvent of truth. And then the truth emerged, brutal and upending everything I thought I knew. Grandmother Eleanor wasn't a gold digger who used her looks to con the Hawthornes. She was once one of the top private art appraisers on the East Coast, hired directly by Sterling's grandfather, Arthur Hawthorne, to authenticate his private collection. She was the one who uncovered Project Caravaggio, a pipeline smuggling forged paintings from Europe to the US and using the Hawthorne name to launder them as authentic. "My God," I whispered, tracing my finger over the final page. She didn't blackmail them for money. She kept the entire original file to hold leverage over Arthur, forcing him to dismantle the ring and donate all the dirty profits to art charity funds. And this Magnolia estate, Holden tapped lightly on the confession letter, is the only material hush money she demanded as a fortress to lock the secret away. But look closely at this paper, Delaney. He clicked on a small UV flashlight attached to his keychain and shined it on the edge of the confession. There were no typewriter indentations on the paper's surface. The ink distribution was far too even. "This is an early generation laser photocopy." I bit my lip. "Exactly," Holden nodded. "Your grandmother was too smart to hide the original in a place the Hawthornes could just send people to tear apart and search. She hid a leaf in a forest. The original is sitting in the City Historical Archives. I've seen a serial number identical to the code at the end of this notebook on a sealed document box in Sector D, Files Pending Destruction." I checked my watch. 2 a.m. "Let's go," I said, grabbing my jacket. "The archives are protected by a magnetic lock system after midnight." Holden hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an ID card with a red border. "But I have Level B security clearance. I can't go inside with you. The main lobby cameras will catch my face, and I'll lose my job before dawn. You go around to the back alley fire exit. Swipe this card. It will disable the Sector D alarm for 15 minutes. I took the card, feeling its weight. 15 minutes is enough. The Charleston Historical Archives was located in the basement of an administrative building built in the 18th century. The smell of mildew and paper dust hit my nose the moment I pushed open the heavy steel door in the back alley. The space was pitch black, lit only by the endlessly blinking red and green LEDs of the server racks. I turned my phone flashlight to the lowest setting, moving along the rows of massive metal shelves stretching endlessly ahead. Sector A, Sector B. My footsteps were swallowed by the torn acoustic carpeting. The freezing air from the document preservation AC system made me shiver. Sector D. I counted from the bottom up, shelf 4, row 12. This was it. A grey cardboard box crisscrossed with red tamper-evident tape, bearing the label, Recalled Files 1993, Pending Destruction. I took the scalpel I kept in my pocket and sliced through the tape in one clean motion. Inside were dozens of worthless manila folders meant for camouflage. I dug deep to the bottom of the box. My hand brushed against a waterproof nylon leather portfolio, stamped on the outside with a red wax seal bearing the Hawthorne Magnolia crest. My lips curled up slightly. The original. But the moment I pulled the portfolio out, a sound echoed that made the blood in my veins run cold. Click. The deadbolt of the Sector D door just snapped shut. A blinding strip of white light from the overhead system suddenly blazed to life, shining directly into my face and forcing me to throw my arm up to shield my eyes. You work quite efficiently, Delaney. A smooth voice echoed from the end of the aisle. The sound of leather soles clicked leisurely against the floor. Sterling Hawthorne stepped out of the shadows. Gone was the dapper suit from the gala. He was wearing a black trench coat and dark leather gloves. His trademark gentlemanly smirk was gone, replaced by the eyes of a predator that had just cornered its prey. "Sterling!" I growled, hastily shoving the portfolio into my jacket, taking a step back and gripping the scalpel tight. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to clean up." Sterling stepped forward, every stride bringing a suffocating pressure. "Did you really think a few snide remarks at a charity gala would earn my respect? My mother is hot-headed. She wanted to use brute force to kick you out, but I prefer playing chess. Why should I tear the Magnolia estate apart when I could let you do the hunting for the original on my behalf?" The razor-sharp truth sliced through my mind. Showing up at my house the other night, inviting me to the gala to apply pressure. It was all an act. He knew my grandmother had left clues, and he needed me, a professional restorer, to decipher them. "Your mayoral campaign," I hissed. "You needed to destroy this original before announcing your run. If news breaks that the Hawthornes are billion-dollar frauds, your political career is over before it even begins." "Very smart." Sterling clapped slowly, the dry sound echoing through the basement. "Politicians don't need the truth, Delaney. They need good stories, and the story of the Hawthorne family must remain flawless. Now, hand me that bag, and I guarantee you'll leave Charleston with enough money to live comfortably in Chicago for the rest of your life." He reached into his trench coat pocket and pulled out a small, ice-cold, suppressed pistol. There was nowhere left to back up. Behind me was a solid brick wall. "Scumbag," I cursed under my breath. I slowly reached into my jacket, pretending to pull the portfolio out. "Don't make any sudden movements," Sterling warned, his finger tightening slightly on the trigger. My hand brushed against the aerosol spray bottle of cleaning solvent, something I always carried to instantly treat mold on antique paper. "You want it, right? Catch!" I yelled, simultaneously yanking my arm out of my jacket. Instead of throwing the files, I sprayed the entire can of stinging, highly pressurized chemicals straight into Sterling. "Ah!" Sterling screamed in pain, the gun in his hand jerking off target. A sharp thwack echoed. The cardboard box on the adjacent shelf was ripped apart. Taking advantage of the split second he was stumbling back, clutching his face, I delivered a full-force kick to his shin, then lunged toward the main electrical breaker panel on the wall. Using the handle of my scalpel, I smashed the plastic protective cover and yanked the breaker switch down. Darkness fell instantly. "Grab her!" Sterling roared into the pitch black. It seemed he wasn't alone. The heavy thud of running footsteps echoed from the main doors. I didn't panic. Darkness is a friend to those used to working in museum basements. I crawled low to the ground, slipping through the gaps between the bookshelves, weaving like a ghost toward the back alley fire exit. As their curses still echoed in Sector D, I shoved the steel door open and bolted out into the pouring Charleston rain. I ran for my life for 3 blocks before spotting Holden's pickup truck parked under a flickering street lamp. I yanked the passenger door open, hurled myself inside, and gasped for air. "Drive, now!" I yelled. Holden didn't ask a single question. He slammed on the gas. The truck roared, tearing through the rain and speeding away. We got back to the Magnolia estate just as the clock struck 4 a.m. Both Holden and I were drenched. I locked every door, drew the curtains, and collapsed onto the tarp-covered sofa in the living room, my heart still pounding like it wanted to burst from my chest. "Did you get it?" Holden approached, his voice carrying an unusual urgency. I nodded, pulling the crumpled nylon leather portfolio out from inside my jacket. My hands were shaking as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a stack of legal certification documents bearing Arthur Hawthorne's original blue ink signatures. It was exactly what we had been looking for. The Hawthorne family was officially in my hands. But as I went to pull the papers out, a small piece of stiff cardboard slipped from the envelope's fold and dropped onto the wooden floor with a thud. It was an old photograph, its edges frayed, printed on 90s photo paper. I bent down and picked it up. In the photo was a young blithe Hawthorne. She was lying in a hospital bed, her face pale, but still radiating her signature arrogance. In her arms, she cradled a red-faced newborn baby. But the thing that made my breath hitch wasn't the existence of a Hawthorne child missing from the family tree. It was a detail on the infant's left wrist, a deep red birthmark shaped like a crescent moon, standing out starkly against the pale skin. The memory from the truck cab flashed through my mind. When Holden reached out to turn the steering wheel, his jacket sleeve had slipped down, revealing a purplish-red birthmark, shaped like a crescent moon, sitting in that exact same spot on his left wrist. I slowly raised my head. Holden was standing in front of me, less than 6 feet away. He was no longer looking at the stack of documents. His amber eyes were pinned on me, deep, dark, and chillingly cold. The light from the desk lamp hit half of his face, revealing a faint but incredibly calculating smile. And at that exact moment, I realized I wasn't just running from the Hawthorne wolves. I had just brought another wolf right into my home. The air in Magnolia's living room suddenly froze. The sound of rain lashing against the window seemed to recede behind a layer of soundproof glass, giving way to the thumping of my own heartbeat ringing in my ears. I stared at the crescent moon birthmark on Holden's wrist, then back down at the photo of a young Blythe holding the baby. The final puzzle piece had clicked into place, but this picture took on a dark, terrifyingly twisted hue. You. The words caught in my throat. You are that child. Holden didn't step forward, but his shadow stretched out under the light, enveloping me. His half-smile no longer held the warmth of a mild-mannered archivist. It was steeped in decades of suppressed malice. A restorer's observational skills are indeed quite impressive, Delaney. Holden slowly peeled off his white cotton gloves and tossed them on the table. Blythe Hawthorne, the proud matriarch of Charleston. 30 years ago she had a whirlwind romance with a poor Italian painter during a trip to Europe. When she found out she was pregnant, she panicked. An illegitimate child would shatter her prearranged high society marriage into the Hawthorne family. It would destroy the perfect facade she spent her life building. He took a step closer, bloodshot lines streaking his eyes. So, she gave birth to me in secret, then threw me into a suburban orphanage. She stripped away my name, my family, my entire life, just so she could comfortably step into that lavish mansion and give birth to Sterling, the golden, legitimate son. And you found out the truth through your job at the archives. I backed away, my hand gripping the original files tight. That's right, Holden gave a cynical laugh. But what good is knowing the truth? A lowly clerk can't topple the most powerful family in South Carolina with just a story. I needed proof. I knew Arthur Hawthorne used money to cover everything up. I also knew your grandmother held their Achilles heel. But she took that secret to her grave, until you showed up. A chill ran down my spine. You weren't at the gala by coincidence. You didn't just happen to drive by when my tire blew out. You orchestrated all of it. You needed me to get into the house to find the clues, because only the legal heir could activate this game. I merely borrowed your hands to unlock the doors, Delaney. And you did a phenomenal job. Holden lunged forward, moving so fast I couldn't react. He shoved me hard onto the sofa, simultaneously violently snatching the nylon portfolio from my grip. I sprang up, reaching for the heavy hammer on the table, but Holden was faster. He grabbed the collar of my jacket, dragging me roughly toward the heavy oak door leading to the basement. "Don't blame me, Delaney. This is a Hawthorne family vendetta," Holden said, his voice ice-cold as he shoved me down the dark stone steps. I stumbled, tumbling down onto the damp dirt floor. Before I could even stand up, the heavy wooden door slammed shut. Click, clack, the sound of metal deadbolts sliding into place outside, locking me inside the thick darkness. "You won't get away with this, Holden," I screamed, slamming my fists against the door. "I don't plan on getting away," Holden's voice echoed through the crack in the door, brimming with triumph. "I'm heading straight to the Hawthorne estate. $50 million is a cheap price to pay for my silence on both Project Caravaggio and my origins. Have a good night's sleep at Magnolia." Holden's footsteps faded away, followed by the roar of the pickup truck as it sped off into the rain. I leaned my back against the freezing door, squeezed my eyes shut, and took a deep breath. The air in the basement reeked of moldy wine and rotting roots. I was locked in. No cell service. The man holding the evidence was on his way to extort them, and once that transaction was complete, both Holden and the Hawthornes would return to clean up my existence. But I am from Chicago, and in Chicago, we don't just sit around waiting to die. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, sweeping the beam around the basement. It was an old wine cellar, filled with empty oak barrels and rusted iron racks. I shined the light on the inside of the wooden door. The lock was a classic cast-iron box lock, incredibly sturdy, but it had been sitting here for over half a century. I pulled the tool bag strapped across my chest around to the front. Restoration work doesn't just teach you how to cherish beauty, it teaches you how to break down the structure of matter. I pulled out a heavy-duty rust-dissolving acid used for stripping oxidized metal from antique frames. I slipped on my rubber gloves, filled a plastic syringe with the potent chemical, and injected it directly into the keyhole and the seams of the iron lockbox. A sizzling sound hissed through the quiet space, white smoke rising and bringing with it the acrid stench of burning metal. I waited patiently for 5 minutes, letting the chemicals eat away at the rusted iron tumblers inside. Then I grabbed a thick iron rod from an old wine rack. Wedging the iron rod into the edge of the acid-softened lock, I put my entire body weight into it and swung my framing hammer to deliver a fatal blow. Crack! The lock shattered. I kicked the door open. The fresh air of the living room rushed in. I bolted out and checked my watch. 6 a.m. Just 15 minutes later, I was behind the wheel of my rented Corolla, slamming the gas and tearing down the oak-lined streets of Charleston. The rain had stopped, leaving behind trails of white fog hovering low over the asphalt. My target was crystal clear, the Hawthorne estate in the south of Broad District. When I arrived, the massive wrought iron gates bearing the Hawthorne crest were wide open. Holden's beat-up truck was parked arrogantly right in front of the marble steps. I yanked the car door open and stepped out, making sure to grab my fully charged phone. The front doors were ajar. I crept up the steps, pressing my back flat against the mahogany siding in the foyer. From this angle, I had a clear view of the entire scene. Blythe Hawthorne was leaning against the Italian marble fireplace, her usually flawless, perfectly made-up face pale, completely drained of blood. Sterling stood protectively in front of her, his eyes wild and his hands balled into tight fists. Opposite them, Holden Croft lounged casually in a genuine leather armchair, the original files resting in his hands. $50 million, Blythe! Transferred to my offshore account by 8 o'clock this morning. Holden's voice rang out clear and dripping with mockery. In exchange, the secret of the Hawthornes' billion-dollar forged art ring, plus the fact that you heartlessly threw away your own flesh and blood to keep this throne, will remain forever in the dark. You're insane, you piece of trash, Sterling roared, stepping forward but stopped in his tracks by Holden's icy glare. You think we're just going to let you blackmail us? What are you going to do, Sterling? Call the police? Holden smirked. Call them, and while you're at it, explain to them about Arthur Hawthorne's original certificate of authentication right here in my hand. Your mayoral campaign will go up in smoke in a heartbeat, and your mother will be wearing a prison jumpsuit instead of silk. You can't do this, Blythe stammered, her trembling voice entirely stripped of its authority. I gave you life. You gave me a leaky orphanage, Holden shouted, slamming his hand down on the glass table. You threw me away, and now it is time you pay back what I am owed. Out in the hallway, I flashed a cold smile. I unlocked my phone and opened a social media app. I tapped the Go Live button, but I wasn't broadcasting to my personal account with just a few hundred followers. I sent the co-host link and directly tagged Mrs. Fiona Abernathy's account, the broadcasting station of Charleston High Society. A woman I knew for a fact was awake at this hour, scouring for gossip after the gala. The second the red Live icon started blinking, the viewer count skyrocketed at breakneck speed. 10, 50, 300, 1,000 people. Fiona had taken the bait and shared the broadcast with the entirety of Southern High Society. Holding my phone, screen facing forward, I casually strolled right through the threshold of the living room. Good morning, Hawthorne family, I called out in a crisp voice, cutting straight through the tension wire atmosphere. Looks like you all are having a cozy little family reunion. Mind if I join? All three of them whipped around simultaneously. Pure terror washed over Holden's face when he saw that I was still alive and had escaped the basement. Delaney? Holden bolted upright. How did I escape? Next time you want to lock up a restorer, don't trap her in a room with a bunch of industrial solvents. I smiled, panning the phone camera to catch each of their faces clearly. But sorry for interrupting. What part were you at? The part about the $50 million extortion, or the part where the Hawthorne family personally authenticated and smuggled fake art for decades? Sterling lunged forward, his eyes bloodshot. You scumbag! Give me that phone! I wouldn't advise doing that, Sterling. I took a step back, rotating the screen to show them. Unless you want to assault a woman live in front of thousands of viewers. Say hi, Mr. Mayoral Candidate. Mrs. Fiona Abernathy is saying hello in the comments. Time seemed to stop. Sterling, Blythe, and Holden stared in stunned horror at the lines of text scrolling furiously across my phone screen. The most familiar names of Charleston's elite were leaving a barrage of shocked, outraged, and disbelieving comments. "Good Lord, Blythe Hawthorne has a secret child? Project Caravaggio, their family are criminals! Call the police immediately!" The magnificent mask of the Hawthorne family shattered, smashed to pieces on the marble floor, completely beyond restoration. Blythe stumbled backward, clutching her chest, and collapsed onto the sofa. Her mouth fell open, but she couldn't utter a single word. Her pride was officially dead. Sterling stood frozen like a statue, clutching his head, realizing his political career and reputation were buried forever. Holden looked at me, sheer panic evident in his eyes. All of his dark extortion plans were exposed to the light. A blackmailer holds zero power when the secret is no longer a secret. He gritted his teeth, dropped the original documents onto the floor, and darted toward the door to flee. But the wail of red and blue police sirens was already blaring in the distance. The livestream viewers had called 911. "Game's over, Holden." I lowered the phone, looking straight into the eyes of the man who had betrayed me. "You wanted the truth. I just gave you and everyone else the truth. Unfortunately, extortion money doesn't process well in prison." Holden glared at me, but there was nowhere left to run. The screeching brakes of police cruisers sounded out in the courtyard. The thunderous sound of boots and shouted orders stormed into the mansion. I stepped back, letting the authorities do their job. I glanced over at Grandfather Arthur's documents scattered haphazardly on the floor, and let out a relieved smile. "Grandma, I did it." 2 weeks later, the Charleston sky was clear and bathed in sunlight. The storms seemed to have been entirely swept out of the city. I stood in front of the gates of the Magnolia estate. The rusted iron gates had been removed, replaced by a pristine white gravel driveway. All around, there was no longer the threatening roar of an excavator, only the sound of birds singing in the ancient oak canopy. Charleston's elite had weathered an unprecedented earthquake. The Hawthorne Empire had completely collapsed. The FBI had stepped in, seizing all their assets to investigate the international art smuggling ring. Blythe and Sterling were facing a slew of criminal charges and were barred from leaving their residence. Holden Croft didn't escape the law either, hit with charges of extortion and accessory to covering up a crime. Magnolia now belonged to me, free of any disputes, not as a piece of loot, but as a legacy that needed protecting. I lifted a gleaming brass plaque from the trunk of my car and walked up the steps. Using brand new screws, I carefully mounted the plaque onto the brick wall right next to the front door. I stepped back, smiling as I admired the elegantly engraved words shining under the radiant sun. "Eleanor Art Museum, where truth and beauty are preserved forever." I took a deep breath of the blooming magnolia scent. Only the light of truth remains.